At the Parisi Palace, high above 3773 East Broadway, this is a live edition of the Jake Feinberg Show, coming to you on Power Talk. We can't thank you enough for making us part of your day today, wherever you are in the world. All one's actions will bear good fruit, however foolish that one might be. Success comes easy to those who love and serve the Guru continually. To wash away all impurities, to rid thyself of all woes and cares. Bathe thyself in this Guru and free thy mind from all earthly snares. Who sings this love song every day? He is a wise and holy man or woman who has in their darshan is blessed as well. He'll never have to be born again. Water's water and rain or sea. The air contained is the air that's free. Milk is milk and a glass are pale. The self in thee is the self in all. Never think to impart my words unto my servants or even gods. Do not tell even my dearest sons, O Parvati, all my words are true. Reveal them only unto that one whose mind is ready to know their worth. O dear beloved, who art myself, he must be loving, he must have faith. To one who's wretched, who's false and mean, who has no love in his heart for God. O Parvati, never think to give unto that person this song of love. Marisa, Radha, Weppner, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Thank you. It's such a treat to do this interview with you.
It's an absolute honor and divine privilege to be connected with you. And just for the audience, that wasn't my poetry. That was Muktananda from the Guru Gita. I want to make sure I source people the way they should be. Radhama, can you talk about, at this point, what you think your purpose is in life?
Yeah, totally. I feel like my purpose in life is to be a teacher and a guide, and I feel like my purpose is to be an example of a way of being for others, and to inspire them that it's possible to live a spiritually charged life while being in this modern world and in the culture, the Western culture and society that we're in. And yoga is definitely part of my dharma. I've been teaching yoga now for almost 20 years. Meditation as well. And yeah, I think that's kind of my life purpose.
You say you are a guide. Was it something that the foresight was something that you were birthed with, or did you have your own guide or guru?
Definitely not something I was birthed with. And growing up, I didn't have a guide or a guru. I was really on my own in lots of ways. Though I grew up in a really large family, it created an environment where the figure out how do I live, how do I grow into adulthood? What are my guiding principles if I don't have a guide? And I realized pretty early on to follow my heart and follow my inspirations and follow what felt most true to me, even though it might not make sense from the logical mind perspective. And so I've crafted my life that way. I have an undergraduate degree and a master's degree in psychology and transpersonal psychology, and I thought I would be in that realm of psychology. But then when I took my first yoga class was in it was probably 2000, I guess. And I recognized just through the practice that I began doing how it was affecting me mentally and physically and spiritually in a really subtle way that I wasn't actually attempting to do, but that gentle transformation was really inspiring with my studies in psychology. And that's what made me want to become a yoga teacher, because I saw that it could bridge, or was a bridge between the spiritual and the psychological for everyday living in life, which was new to me. I didn't really know much about yoga before I started practicing. I practiced out of a book. I didn't have like an in-person guide.
Would you consider yourself? This is interesting. I mean, were you? Is it just because you lived in a rural area, or you just were introverted? You didn't, or you just wanted to go on your own path and figure it out for yourself?
That I didn't have a guide, you mean?
Yeah.
Well, I wasn't in a rural area. I grew up in Daytona Beach.
Oh, wow. That is just unbelievable.
Daytona in the 80s and 90s.
Oh, that was, that was a more peaceful time in the eastern seaboard of redneck Florida, you know. I mean, it was heavy, you know. It was a very intense vibe, but it wasn't nearly as callous or violent as it is today, I think.
No. I mean, it was just the party vibes, you know. It was
big party,
break.
that's right,
it was
yeah.
people having fun. It was just like debauchery, really.
Right. So was that something, but so were you trying to find some peace from that, and you did it on your own, or did you dive into the party scene?
I wouldn't say that I dove into the party scene, but because I didn't have like guidance in my family, and I was sort of left on my own to figure it out, in that environment, there were definitely drugs around. And so when I was 15, I took LSD for the first time. And that was the first drug really I ever did. Like a couple times before that, I maybe tried to smoke pot a few times.
Right.
And so I went from like maybe kind of trying to smoke pot but not really getting anywhere to all of a sudden taking LSD, and it wrecked me.
Was it was it a bad trip or a good trip?
Oh, it was horrific.
Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. I'm
terrible.
telling you, I've been on that end, and it is a lonely and a place that you don't feel you're ever going to come back from. I don't like it. I'm sorry.
Totally.
It
was the hell realm. I was
the hell realm.
thrust into like hell and like shamanic death on like every level. And I was like raw little baby psyche with no guidance. And coming out of that, I had to put myself back together. And I didn't have any guidance for that, but I now was blasted into this new understanding of myself and the nature of reality that I didn't have prior to that experience, and I wanted to figure it out. And so that began my spiritual journey at 15. And so then I started to read what books I could find, which weren't very many, on spirituality or mysticism or Buddhism. And that's where I would like come across the word yoga, but I didn't really know what it was. And there wasn't a yoga scene. No one was practicing yoga.
No. I'm surprised there was a public library. I'm kidding. No, I mean, it's no, but you know, I think it's just really important, Radha, like in this time. I mean, I've been on my journey for 9 years, and it's been completely non-logical and all heart-based, and there's been some consequences to it, and there's also been I've been scaling a lot of mountaintops, and you know, I wanted you to. Could you give an example early on of when you followed your heart in a non-logical fashion against what society said you should have done?
Spirituality, continued to explore psychedelics. I got my degree in psychology and I graduated. And then I knew I wanted to become a yoga teacher so that I could merge the psychology and yoga together. So I was going to take a year off of school before going to graduate school, and I wanted to travel the world and go to India and study at different ashrams, and I had a big plan for myself to do that solo, which I was really excited about. And that September was September 11th, and in January was when I was supposed to start my travels, and I was going to India. But right before that, September 11th happened, and it kind of changed the idea of like me just going to the Middle East and traveling as a young woman, because we didn't know what was happening at that time, and all the stuff with like, you know, the war in Afghanistan and things like that kind of bubbling. So I rerouted, and it was like, well, I still want to go and I want to travel and study yoga. Where can I go to do that? And so I just kind of Googled like yoga training international or internationally or something like that, and found the Nosara Yoga Institute in Costa Rica. And it was a month-long immersion where you would live in Costa Rica and to get your teacher training. And I thought, okay, well, that's perfect. I can go to Costa Rica by myself. That's no problem. So then I did that. And while I was there, how short can I make this story? While I was there,
dude, there's nothing. We have nothing but time, Boise. We're we're in Big Sky country right now. So you just go.
Oh, you're in Big Sky.
No. You are. But I mean,
I
I'm in the Southwest. But I'm just saying we have nothing but high skies and time. So you don't have to truncate a story if it's a good one.
Let's just say one afternoon during the yoga training, I had a vision in my shavasana, in my meditation, of a didgeridoo. And back home in Florida, I would play the didgeridoo just kind of for fun.
Oh,
I was like, oh, that'd be a great idea. I would love to have a didgeridoo down there while I'm in the training. And I was like, oh, there's a little spot down the way that's surrounded by bamboo. I wonder if they'll give me a piece of bamboo. And so the next day I went into the little office, and there was a gringo there, and I'm like, hey, I know this is a weird question, but I was wondering if I could have a piece of your bamboo. And he looked at me and he said, why? Do you want to make a didgeridoo? And I'm like, yeah, that's exactly what I want to make. So he says, let me introduce you to somebody that'll help you. I'm like, cool.
Wow.
We go into the little hotel, and there's a juice lab that they called it. And he introduced me to a guy, and he said, hey, will you help this young girl make a didgeridoo? And he kind of scowled at me, the guy behind the juice lab, and said, yeah, come back tomorrow. So I came back the next day, and then he and I proceeded to hang out over the course of the next week, because we were making this didgeridoo in the afternoon, out of rebar and bamboo, just kind of hollowing it out. And he and I were becoming friends. And then the next week I took a nap in the afternoon, and I woke up from the nap, and I had this vision, this clear vision coming out of my nap of this little girl who was maybe 2 years old, and she had huge blue eyes and curly blonde hair. It was the most precious thing you'd ever seen. And I knew that if this guy that I was making the didgeridoo with and I were to be in a relationship, we would have this baby. It was just that. And I was like, oh my God, that's so fascinating. Wow. And internally I wanted this baby so bad. And at the time I was 22, just out of school, right? So I don't have a job. I don't really have any resources. I don't have a house. I'm not set up, let's say, to have a baby in any way, shape, or form. But my heart wanted to have this baby. And this guy, he was a fantastic guy, but it wasn't love at first sight kind of thing. It was I want to have this baby with this guy that I just met. I want the baby. And so he and I then proceeded to be in a relationship. I didn't, of course, say to him I had a vision that we were going to have a baby, but I would drop clues or say every now and then that I wanted to have a baby, and I was kind of I was priming the pump. And then we are in Costa Rica together. We're in a relationship, and I go back to Florida. Then I come back, and we spend more time together in Costa Rica. He's Canadian. And then the summer we spent apart, and we met up again that September in Ottawa, where he was, and we did a Ashtanga training together with Batabi Joyce, and I did my first Vipassana 10-day silent retreat. He and I did it together, and then we decided to drive from Ottawa down to the Yoga Institute where I was trained and that kind of stuff. So then we did that, and then on the way down, on the drive down, we were in Guatemala, and he says, let's try to have a baby. And I'm like, awesome, let's try to have a baby.
Wow.
Which is what I had been hoping for. And then we try to have a baby, and I get pregnant, and we're living in Nosara. And then I was like, what are you doing? Now what are you going to do? You're going to have a baby now? And I was so sort of distraught and confused and uncertain and just what were you thinking? You don't think that you want to marry this guy. He's a wonderful guy, but it didn't seem like this is my guy kind of thing.
Sure.
Just he was awesome. He was great. But it was do I live in Costa Rica? Do I have the baby here? Do we go to Canada? Do we stay together? Do we not stay together? What do I do? What do I do now? And a couple weeks after I called my mom to tell her that I was pregnant, she called me to say that she was pregnant also.
Wow.
And this was her 7th child.
Wow.
She'd had 7. She had already had 6 kids by then.
How old was she at that point?
she was my age. She was 40. I'm 41, so she was probably like 42 or 43. She was probably 43.
Wow.
So she was 43, and she got pregnant. And then after living in Costa Rica and being pregnant most of the time there, when I was like 6 or 7 months pregnant, I said to my partner, I'm like, look, I'm going to go up to Montana. My family had moved from Florida to Montana, and spend the rest of my pregnancy with my mom, because how cool is that she's pregnant too, and we could do this together. And he and I were kind of like hot, cold in a way. Like, he knew that I didn't want to get married, and I didn't know if I wanted to stay together. And I was in that state. So he went back to Canada, and we spent the summer apart, where he was in Canada working. I was in Montana with my family. And then he came out to Montana right before I was about to have my daughter. And fast forward, my mom and I spend our summers together pregnant, mother and daughter pregnant at the same time. And she goes into labor, and I go to the hospital with her while she's having my brother. And when she's pushing him out, my water breaks, and I go into labor.
Oh, my God. This is blowing my... This is wild.
And so then my daughter, the one that I had the vision of, she was exactly like that. And my brother were born on the same day in the same hospital.
Wow, that is absolutely... So, with time as your friend, what is it all... How have you rationalized it?
How have I rationalized...
I mean, looking back on the idea of well,
it wasn't rational.
No. I mean, like when you talk about the level of coincidence goes beyond the percentage, and there are no coincidences. So the idea that you go to do the yoga training, you go to seek music with the didgeridoo, you find a guy that you think is great, have a vision, and then in the long run, you wind up birthing your baby the same day as your brother. I mean, looking back on it at that point, that you can't get much more divine than that. I mean, looking back on it, does it make sense?
Looking back, it feels really synchronistic, and I knew that I was following my heart way beyond the logic of my mind, because if I were to think about it, it would be a terrible idea to decide to have a baby with somebody that you had barely met and know. And
yeah, but I actually think that's kind of... I mean that... Tell me something. I mean, because it's a little bit perplexing. I mean, I was married for 13 years and two amazingly awesome love children, and I love them, and I'm 42. And after maybe... I mean, I look at it as a chapter of my life, and it was something that provided a lot. There was obviously love, but towards the end it was not great. And so apprehension to a domesticated relationship, I think, is completely understandable. But I guess just in the essence of creating and co-joining in body language for lovers and creating a child, and I realize that there's plenty of people it just doesn't work out, but why not why not at least be together to raise your child together?
Yeah, well, we decided to not be together.
Yeah, see, I don't. Yeah, that to me, like, if I don't, everyone's in their own boat. But he knew you didn't. He wanted to get married, and you just didn't want to get married.
I think he would have gotten married. We didn't really actually talk about marriage too much. It was more like, are we going to stay together, and are we not going to stay together? And I just had such a strong sense that he wasn't my guy, and that there was another woman for him that would be the proper partner for him, that would be so devoted and so loving and so just stoked this is her guy.
Sure.
And I wasn't that partner for him. And so with our daughter, when we had her, for me, it was, we could try to be together, and then probably eventually we wouldn't be together. We would break up. So why don't we start her life with us not together, because we're going to eventually not be together.
Did you have a vision that you wouldn't be together? I mean, did you already, it was just...
I just knew.
Yeah, I know, that's why the spirit... So the prophetic, psychospiritual, true nature of yours, how did you persevere early on with the demands of the baby, and also your desire to become a healer? I mean, how did you use that to allow yourself to continue to trust your heart and maybe continue down the illogical path?
Well, I was teaching yoga at that point, and going through a fire like that, there's a lot of judgment and stigmatism that comes with being like an unwed young mother, right? So even like this perception of like, oh, I'm sure she accidentally got pregnant, now she's got to figure it out and take care of it. Like, I knew that wasn't the truth of the story. And so because I knew what was true, when I know what's true in my heart, it doesn't affect me, other people's perceptions, if they might be different than my truth, because I know what's really true. And so I learned that lesson, that I could move through other people's judgments and not take those on and judge myself, and continue to follow my own path. And I ended up staying in Montana, rural Montana, where my family was, for 5 years, because when I had my daughter, my brother was basically her brother. And so they were like little twin besties. And my family out there, they had a ranch.
This is absolutely adorable.
For the first couple years, there was like a little apartment in the barn. So I had like a little apartment in the barn, and then there was the house, the cabin, and then my mom, she was inspired by me being a yoga teacher, so she went to go and do her yoga teacher training also. So when the babies were 2 months old, my mom left for a month and left me with both little babies to raise, so she could do her training, and then she came back and we opened a yoga studio together. So we have a studio together in Montana that she runs now, but we did it together for the first 5 years.
That is so hip. Oh, my God.
So just doing that, kept going with the practice. I started to study too transpersonal psychology, which I knew was where it was going to take me in the psychological realm, and also just living in rural Montana. I had somewhat of a backwards 20s, where most people in their 20s are quite free and liberated. And like, if I hadn't had my daughter, I would have stayed like bohemian traveler hippie chick, right? And instead I had a baby that I had to raise. So instantly it was like, well, you got to get serious, because now you're taking care of a baby.
Well, I mean, it can go both ways. I mean, I wonder if you're sort of, because you didn't have a lot of structured guidance from your parents growing up. I mean, I wonder if that, in that because you really kind of had to think for yourself at a young age and make decisions at a young age. And, I just wonder if that was, if that really aided you when you were just a young mother, as opposed to, people in younger cats, I can only speak for myself, but I think that they are, there's not a lot of wisdom per se, and so that might show that it's liberated, but there's a lot of almost, like the stigma that was delivered to you by people that are, in the judgment, that's because, unfortunately, that's a lot of times what happens, people just, they just, and, were you able to acknowledge this divine dream to those people at that time, so that whether or not they agreed with what you did or could understand it, they would at least respect you?
I would say I probably didn't share that with too many people. I just kept, I was more like embodying the truth versus telling the truth. So I was letting my actions be more present with it. And my daughter, I wanted her so badly. It was just like such an urge and such a calling. And then when I had her, I had the bonus of my mom having just had a baby, so that the help that was there for me as a young mother was so present, because everything they were doing for my brother, they were doing for my daughter too. And so it was really like a village that was helping to raise her and my brother, because I was there too.
Radha, we have a game on this program called Name That Voice. I'm going to put this in for you right now, and we'll come back and break it down.
Okay.
Neither of my parents, my father was Cherokee. He didn't grow up in a Cherokee community on a reservation, but he held a lot of the values, the spiritual values of the Cherokee Nation. My father was also a Baptist preacher, and so I think that the greatest thing that came from my dad was to grow up with him explaining living our Christian religion, but also telling us that it's the same thing. I think those who are on a spiritual path not always are religious, but with us, we were both, and he would help us understand how there was God and everything around us. My Indian grandmother did the same thing. She would come and take us all into the woods in the winter when it was cold and everything was dry and there was no apparent life in the woods. And she would say, "Get something that you think is ugly." And we would gather these baskets of these gnarly-looking burrs and sticks and things, and we go back to our house, and Mama, we called her Mama Coolidge, and she would arrange all of these things in beauty and used paints and would make something beautiful out of everything. And she said there's beauty everywhere.
Radha, you want to take a guess at who that is? It's a very famous country R&B singer. I mean, you are a DJ, right? You're a musical cat too, right?
Yeah.
I know. I love you. We haven't even tapped in.
I
Okay. Yeah. So I mean, that could be like 9 million. That was my interview with. You want to take a guess? Because sometimes people guess this stuff.
I mean, my guess would be either I would think of like the three great country music singer women that come to mind, which would be like Dolly Parton or Reba McEntire or Bonnie Raitt, or the one with the long hair.
Yeah,
Loretta?
that's her. Loretta Lynn. No, I mean basically, that was my interview from March 16th, 2016, with Rita Coolidge.
Rita Coolidge.
Rita,
okay, cool.
and I wanted to ask you, Radha, like, if you can talk about a time where. Because I think we're in a time like this right now, and it's a matter of creating something out of nothing, and it requires you tapping into your Tao as a Tao cultivator, your true nature, but essentially using your native gifts when you had to improvise and create out of nothing. Similar to, I guess what I'm trying to say is her grandmother. There's a couple of salient things in there, but basically she took them around in the, I think Nebraska, Oklahoma. I can't remember where Rita was raised, and she obviously had a very multi-religious sort of upbringing. But, the grandma was Cherokee, and she would basically teach her that everything has beauty. And in this time, spirit, Radha, is the only currency. And I want you to talk about a time in your life when you created something out of nothing.
A time when I created something out of nothing. I feel like I've done that many times in my life, just from having really limited resources in the classical sense. But I love how they're pointing in that talk to returning to nature and elevating the beauty of nature.
Absolutely.
Even when it's in the cycle that might be something like death or decay. Often that's what we think of as the not beautiful pieces, and bringing new life to them. And in this time, I certainly feel like we're in a process of release and transformation, that we're on a bridge between an old way of being that will no longer be anymore. It's totally different and done, and into a new way of being, but we don't know yet what that new way of being is. Like, we're still actually on the bridge, and what it's going to be will be shaped by, I hope, our spirits, because that's the piece that's like yearning and screaming and begging to be reintegrated. That's the way I see it. The cause of so many conditions right now, of separation and disconnection and depression and anxiety and addiction, and just the way that we've been so blinded to, myself included, the impacts that we're having on the natural world around us, because we live so separate from it. And so even just this act that she spoke to of going out in winter and being in nature and connecting to something, I feel like even that kind of simple process right now, if we were to walk out our front doors and find somewhere in the natural world, whether it's like a foothills or a hike or the ocean, and just being in nature, it's not like we have to create something out of it, but really just be with it.
When you think back to the gravy years of Daytona Beach, I mean, did you make castles in the sand? Did you?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, can you talk about? I mean, because a lot of cats, like, I mean, did you play drums? Like, to me, like, when I mean, without getting too psychospiritual here, I mean, you are like, you have many years, you have a lot of wisdom, although you haven't been on this planet for a long time. It's very evident in your aura and your soul. So I feel like that is something that manifested early on because you were not constrained with helicopter parents.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, growing up in Daytona, we were really poor too. And so one of the things that you can do is go to the beach because it's free. And so we went to the beach all of the time. And I mean, all of the time we were at the beach, swimming in the ocean and making sandcastles. I'm an expert drip sandcastle maker.
Oh my, I mean, I've always lacked that skill. I mean, so you were making like, I mean, the whole beach, so like a quarter of the beach would be this huge cast. You'd be out there.
That's an exaggeration.
An ashram or something. No, I'm kidding. But it's like, but
I'd be in the sands making castles all day, every day, if I could, and shell collecting and just swimming and surfing and bodyboarding and communing with the ocean. Really, in lots of ways, the ocean, the beach raised me. Like, that gives me one of the deepest feelings of home and mother. Even now, I always want to return to the ocean, and every time I get there, it's like I feel like I've come home again. So the environment of that energy is so soothing and nurturing to me. And you're right, I didn't have constraints. I didn't have expectations about what I was going to do.
Well, that's even more important. That was actually more important, because then the sky's the limit if you are a seeker.
The sky's the limit, but I had no assistance, you know?
Yeah, but I guess that's what I'm saying is, you know, you learn to operate with no roadmap. And so, you know, it was more like a board game, and I mean, you just had to go on feel. It was like riding the waves, letting the body dance on the buoyant, you know, seaboard. You know, it's really an amazing. But did you have a spiritual family member like Rita talked about that would, you know, I mean, maybe you were going off into the. I mean, there's not a lot of forests in Daytona Beach, but right.
We were raised with Sunday school and catechism and confirmation and communion and the pageants during Christmas and that. We were raised deep in the Catholic Church.
And so,
but I didn't feel a connection to it. It wasn't like a guiding principle.
Right. You feel like people are reading out of Scripture as opposed to actually communicating directly with the divine, right? That's what your gift was, right?
It was lifeless. I didn't really understand it. I didn't feel a connection to it in any way, though I wanted to. And right before I had that LSD experience, my stepdad that I was raised with and my mom, they got divorced when I was maybe like 13 or so. And so then we stopped going to church. And so I had these couple of years where I wasn't going to church. And right at that point, I was internally contemplating or realizing that I wanted to have some spiritual connection, but I don't think I knew really the word spirituality at that point. I only knew religion. And so I was just about to make the choice to like choose to be in the church as like a teenager, because I knew something in there was important that I was lacking. I didn't know what it was. And then I took LSD, and then it was, well, I'm definitely not going back to the church now, because everything they've been telling me, my whole life is none of that is true. None of those constructs are true.
Okay, so just for the people that are listening around the world that may not know exactly what were the rigid thought patterns that blew away for Radha at that time?
The separate nature of reality, that there was a God somewhere, and that the priest was an intermediary, and that if I did the right things within the construct of the religion, like, I don't know, let's say confession and all of that, and went to church and did the sacrament and talked to the priest, then I could have a connection to God. And so then with my psychedelic experience, it was, well, everything is God, and the whole nature of reality is a construct.
Yes.
And I want to get through the veil.
It doesn't sound like a bad trip to me.
Oh, trust me, it was. I thought I had died.
Let's just walk through it, because that happened to me at Boston University. I graduated in 2000. I remember just being in a lonely dorm, just saying, I can't believe that my parents invested all this money and I'm going to the loony bin. I really just thought, I didn't feel myself dying. But
I actually thought I
okay, what was that? Can you explain how far into the trip that was, and then ultimately what that experience was like?
Again, I had no preparation for what a hallucination might be.
Yeah, it's fine.
It's fine. But I was sitting on the porch swing. It's in the summer, it was in the spring in Florida, sitting on the porch swing. It's at night. My friend's next to me, and we had taken the LSD, but then we had also smoked weed, which really heightens it.
That's when, I want to tell you, I just want to interject here. It's interesting, because I'm sorry to cut you off, but there's No,
go ahead.
The last couple of years, I've been in a very Kerouacian mode, being on the road, doing a lot of journalism, using new media, and letting the body dance. So the point is that some of my friends, we'll have like maybe a small dose of mushrooms or something. But at one of these events last November, my friend took a hit of acid. I don't know how, it was just one hit. It wasn't like an over amount, but the minute you smoke the reefer, that's when it kicks in. If you don't really smoke the marijuana, it's a very different trip. But then you're over the edge, and at that point you're in the deep end, whether you like it or whether you can handle it or not.
So my first experience was being thrown into the deep end, and I don't know how to swim in the deep end of this experience.
Right.
So that happened, and I looked out. We were on the porch swing. I looked through the screen, and there's a street light, and I look at the street light, and the street light turns into this swirling tunnel, and it's like the Terrence McKenna described, like elf demons. And so I immediately see demons. Like, that's my first hallucination, is this like swirling tunnel of demons.
That's that's bad. It's not good.
And because of my Catholic upbringing.
Right. Wait, okay, so I want to be clear. When you saw the imagery of the underworld, the guilt started to come in? Is that really what happened? You said, oh my God,
No, it was more like fear. Like, oh shit.
So that you believed you had left the body and gone to hell.
Yeah.
This is remarkable. Yeah, okay, so this is petrifying. what was your state? Do you remember if you were in a happy state of? A lot of times people say if you're going to trip out, you should really be in a great space or as good a space. Do you remember where you were at before you ingested the LSD?
I would say, I was with my friends and I was curious. I was with a good friend and a new boyfriend and a couple newer friends. So it wasn't like, I wasn't with people that I knew very well, but I think I felt fine enough doing it. But I also was incredibly naive. I didn't know what I was about to get myself into. I had no context for what was about to happen or what could happen. Zero. So I would just describe myself as naive. The effects that it had.
Well, let me ask you one question now. How did you were way too long at sea. How did you get back to the shore? What was the turning point to get you back to the idea that, you were gonna be okay?
I think it was riding the whole thing out.
Jeez.
It was like 6 or 8 hours where finally it begins to wear off, and then you go to sleep, and then you wake up the next day, and you're like, holy shit, what was that? And because of that, and like I said, in Daytona, in that culture, there's so much access to drugs and party. And, right then after that was like the rave scene and the ecstasy scene of the early 90s, mid-90s. That was all present too. And so while a lot of my peers were going deep into that realm, because of my first experience, I only could view psychedelics, whether it's MDMA or pot or LSD or mushrooms, as something very important. And so I've never really been able to do them just recreationally. It's always a big experience for me.
It's profound. Yeah, it's, did you make it? Did you get to college? Where did you go to college?
Yeah, I went to the University of Central Florida, and then I went to the University of South Florida, where New College was. And coincidentally, MAPS, the headquarters of MAPS, was in Sarasota. And so in the late 90s and early 2000s, at school there, we were friends with Rick Doblin. We would go to his house and experiment, let's say.
What does that mean?
Just like, we were quite liberated with our use of psychedelics.
So, when you talk about it, the psychospiritual aspects of having a long, were you having sanghas? Were you having, can you talk, with somebody that would, be a sort of an overseer? Where there be, somebody like...
No, back in those days, there with MAPS, that's the Multidisciplinary Association of Psychedelic Studies. It wasn't within the container that it is now. It was just kind of beginning to do the PTSD research and things like that. I think we were more in still an experimental phase, but it was just very liberating. It was incredibly creative. Everybody was so creative.
Well, can you put it? Because this is where my show, The Rubber Meets the Road. The experimentation is key, and there were no rules. It's like going back to the '60s with. You talk to any jazz musicians, there were no schools teaching jazz. Juilliard wasn't teaching jazz. They could make up the rules on their own. That's why the music grew. So you guys could make up the rules. Paint the picture of what one of these, for lack of a better word, there was, I don't know if there were concerts, but it was kind of like an experimental acid test of the going into the new century.
Yeah, and a lot of the folks and friends that we were with were dabbling in different forms of Eastern spirituality. So meditation would be involved, and breath work, lots of music, all different kinds of music, listening to music or playing music together. Yoga became a part of it too, through the experiences to, access different states of being.
And then ultimately it was something, did you ever experience sex or intimacy on LSD?
No. It took me a long time, again, to actually do LSD itself. I don't think I did LSD. Maybe a couple times. But
so at MAPS, it was more like mushrooms or something not chemically based.
DMA, for sure.
What is that? Not even hip to that.
You know ecstasy, don't you?
MDMA? I never went there. Never even went there. I was not really in the rave scene at all. Ecstasy, I know the name. I don't know. There was just something there that it just never found me.
Well, it's a heart opener and it's a connector, and you can feel very heightened physical sensations. For me, it was never one that was also sexual. Like, it wasn't the lower chakras of sexuality. It was more like heightened heart chakra based, or 6th or 7th chakra expressive, like divine connection that you could get into.
Can you talk about a particular time when you connected with the divine? Because that's the other thing Rita said, was that even though her dad was a Baptist preacher, all the gods are the same, and we are all one, and we all have God inside of us. And so, can you talk about communicating with God when you're in a altered psychospiritual state?
Yeah, I would say that with other plant medicines like ayahuasca, that one, it can feel like there's an external embodiment of the divine. That's been my experience, like the grandmother states.
Sure.
And it's more, for me, it's been more like a presence and a knowing versus a conversation, communication. There's been times on like San Pedro where I've had experiences of the Buddha. I haven't had experiences of Jesus or God. For me, Guadalupe is very present. I think what also comes forward too is the more indigenous traditions and cultures, like my fascination and love of the Maya and the Toltecs and the Incas and those energies, particularly with like mushrooms. That for me would feel like it would come to the surface.
Wow.
But it almost at the same time feels alien.
Why?
I guess the form that it takes, the form and the energy that it takes.
Interesting.
An alien meaning not like, big head, big eye kind of alien, but alien meaning like
foreign, not yeah, totally. That makes it makes it not less authentic, but sometimes more hard to sit in the mess. I mean, as a prophet, although I know you wouldn't call yourself that.
No, not at all.
No. But I mean, some of your vision, as a visionary, and a psychospiritualist, as I am as well. Although it's still muddy. What is, you referred to this transitional bridge of the old way to the new way. Is it as simple as? Can you just be as honest as possible in the sense of, will that new way cultivate in our lifetime, or are we looking at a much darker road before it gets lighter?
That's a great question, and I've had several people ask me that same question.
And I wanted to say, I don't want you to. I know you're also, well steeped in all types of spiritual texts, and you read. I want your intuition. I don't want any other. I don't want you to cite anything. I just want Radha.
Sure. I would say that my response would be, and has been, I really don't know. I feel like I'm in a state of not knowing. I feel like we're in the void.
Yeah, that's pretty accurate.
I feel like being in the void is part of the birthing process. And I could have my hopes about how it might turn out, but I don't know. I honestly do not know. I have a tendency to be very optimistic and hopeful, and so I lean towards that. But honestly, it could get a lot worse before it gets better, and in some ways, it might not be able to get better unless it gets worse first, and that's part of the cycle of existence.
Do we need, I mean, the blue eyes of your daughter came to you in Costa Rica. What's the last vivid, stark dream that stands out that you've had that's going to have an impact on your existence?
Well, I've recently gotten the hit that I have a yoga studio here that I opened 10 years ago that I've been, I love it. It's one of, like, a deep dharma of mine. It's like, I'm
great.
supposed to not have the studio anymore. How is that going to look? I don't know how that's going to look, but I think
What's
I'm
that
not
about?
supposed
So
to
tell
be
me,
the owner.
what's the, you think it might, where you think you would become more inward? I've noticed that in this, I've been on this barrage of connecting with these all sorts of different healers and people, and some of the more inspiring ones just sort of they're all inspiring, but some that have been on the path longer have been in a very inward place. Like it's not the light is there, but it's they're kind of trying to keep their own internal light on. And like you said, you're a natural optimist,
Yeah, I would almost say it's for me a both and, where I feel like I'm very, very internal and I have a strong connection to that place within myself. And the shadow side of that could be that I don't pay enough attention to the external world around me. And personally, I felt my call to be more earth, like actual earth-based. And so it would be continuing to do my practices, my sadhanas that fulfill me internally and continue to charge me, and that's a part of me, while I feel like I actually need to become more environmentally aware. And right when this COVID was happening in mid-March, when we weren't quite sure, like, are we going to lock down? Am I going to close the studio? What's going to happen?
Mm-hmm.
I went on a hike with my partner, and on the hike, I found this hawk that had died for some reason by the creek that we were at, and there were hawk feathers everywhere. There was a hawk skull, like a whole entire head of the hawk. And I knew that this was a symbol for me. This hawk energy was wanting to come through me, and so it's been with me since then. And I had the skull, and I took it home and cleaned it and did all the processing with it, which I'd never done anything like that before. But the energy of it feels like one of trying to see from a higher vision, instead of being like down on the ground, like the muck of the day-to-day, but really trying to see 360, which means where we've come from and where we're going and where we're at now, but being mindful of integrating the where we've come from phase that's wanting to die away, so that as we move into where we're going, we're able to free ourselves of the conditioning and the ignorance that we've been living in. Because a lot of what we've been doing as humans on the planet, it's just not sustainable. It's not, we cannot actually continue with our quote unquote normal. We won't continue as a species.
Yeah, that was profound. You're saying the hawk was dead, yet he was decapitated?
Yes.
And Radha, you took it home and cleaned it and then put it in your study?
Yeah, now it's like it's a totem piece on my altar.
I love this stuff.
And that energy came with me. I did a psilocybin ceremony a few weeks ago, and that like imagine like Return of the Bird Tribes, like hawk goddess.
It was a conference of the birds. Yeah. I have another voice to play for you, and then we'll come back and break it down. I will say, I mean, now that I've tapped into like these, I will say it's about education, Brian, but I will say I don't know how cats. We're not being taught in the school systems. My kids, your kids, we're not being taught education. We're being taught a white Anglo view of history. So you can say education. People are going to say, "Oh yeah, my kids are in school. They're going to college. That's education."
Yeah,
but it's
not
the
education I mean.
No.
The education I'm talking about is the cultivation of intelligence. The cultivation of the ability to ascertain the truth of something, through analysis, through facts.
And that's and that's
This
part of
not
it is
something that
how
we
to
are taught
think.
in school.
Yeah, it's about how to think and not what to think. I mean, that was prevalent.
Exactly.
How did you learn? You just were very poetic there about deciphering things through accumulation. Can you give us some examples of outside of the academy where, I mean, you told me the story the first time about being bussed and, you know, these guys from Holy Innocents would come down and then, you know, I'm talking outside of school. How did you accumulate knowledge?
I've had a lot of friends, you know, and I can't think of any enemies, you know, and in retrospect in my life, I can't tell you that they were all any race or religion or sex.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? Or gender. And so from this, I've come to understand, okay, that it's the character of an individual, okay, that you need to pay attention to. And ultimately, the character of yourself, okay? Once we begin to focus on that, we automatically become 100%, or maybe 90% less judgmental. Because we realize that we cannot even uphold the standards that we believe should be upheld.
Absolutely.
Well, how can we expect that of anyone else? You know, if you're trying to evaluate your relationship or the positivity of your relationship with another individual or the benefit of your relationship with another individual, what does their race or belief system or age or gender preference have anything to do with that? It doesn't, because you can have positive and negative, you can have negative experiences with anybody, you know, with anybody, including your own family members, including those closest with you. And then you can experience random acts of kindness from absolute strangers.
Radha, that was. Are you familiar with Gil Scott Herron?
Yeah.
Right. So that was his main writing partner and collaborator in the '70s, Brian Jackson. So they put out all these incredible albums in the '70s together, and I did a couple interviews with him. And you know, Radha, I don't. I mean, I clearly knew what I wanted to do at Boston University. I got a broadcasting degree, but you know, you were 22 and you know, you were having dreams and following those dreams and completing that stuff. And I kind of walked away from broadcasting. I just hadn't found my voice. I was too insecure. I actually wound up in Jupiter, Florida for a minute and then went down to in Tampa. I guess that's Central Florida or South Florida. Took a couple classes there. But, you know, on this journey, these elders, all 1,500, 1,700 of them or more, have educated me. I mean, I consider myself a blind monk stumbling into grace. And when I see you, I've never met you. I haven't met a lot of people. But when I see you, I see a kind of person that I know I need to connect with because it's the only thing that is going to keep us together is connectivity with authentic people. And he just said something there where you can have disagreements or arguments or with your own family members, or you can have complete acts of kindness from complete strangers. And I just wonder, as we move forward, you know, if you can talk to people who are seeking, but they are petrified of breaking the bounds of the rigid thought patterns that have come up in their lives. I know plenty of if you do retreats, I'm sure there are people that are working on this stuff with ayahuasca and things like that. But I'm talking more about the collective minority of people that are just where emotion is superseding their ability to think illogically with love. And I just wanted you to talk to people out there who you may not interact with a lot, that about why it's okay to be afraid and how to allow those walls to start to come down. Because
Sure,
people are showing up. People are showing up with bazooka guns at legislators now. We're real close to full-fledged kind of mini civil wars breaking out, and I'm not being trite about that.
Yeah, it's something certainly to speak to. And in my own life, like this past 2 weeks, I would say, I've just been going through it. Like my wounds have been up. I've been angry. I've been insecure. I've felt sad. I've been anxious. I've been avoidant. Like all of the bristles have been there. And I've just been in a deep practice of working with that. It's not my normal state, but boy, have I been in the fire. And so I think when you're in that state, it's important to recognize really that you are in it. And so the emotions are there. And I look at it as an opportunity to, in some ways, it's like a wound that you've ripped the bandage off and it's oozing and pussy and gross and sore and tender and red. And internally you can feel that, the embodiment of that. And light or awareness and air is what brings healing to those wounds. And so for me, in the process I've been in, I've really been like sitting with the feelings, even though they feel so intensely painful at times, and then continuing to do my practices. And I ask for help. Like I turn towards my gurus or guides or teachers, and I do my bhakti practice, and I spend time outside in nature and with the earth. And like I said before, I'm really redirecting my energy and focus and attention to the earth, and more of like a being sense and almost like a grieving, helping sense too. Like how can, like seeking help and grounding from just the elements and elemental nature of the earth and the sun and the sky and the waters. And I feel like you could choose a lot of those different gateways to heal those internal pains that you're feeling, and that you don't have to necessarily psychoanalyze all of it and figure it all out from an intellectual, rational level. Like I know why I'm feeling this pain, but I'm doing the thing that's helping to alleviate the pain, and over time, just staying present with it. Time is one of the greatest healers. So sticking with it, doing your practices, and trusting in the process too, knowing that feeling your own shadow is what allows you to integrate. And I think we're being asked to become more integrated beings and see each other as integrated beings too, which means very complex. None of us are one-dimensional. I'm not happy and perfect all of the time.
You're not?
Sometimes I'm Sometimes I'm grumpy.
I know.
I'm
sure you're a hawk warrior. I mean, you're a hawk sometimes. You're
I'm all of it. And
yeah.
so I'm trying to be all of it for myself and honor that I'm feeling all of it while I'm doing that for others too, and allowing others to be multidimensional as well. And I think when we can see each other as multidimensional, multifaceted beings, that helps us to connect, similar to what he was saying too, that there's a lot of opportunity when we stop judging others to feel that connection with strangers and to recognize that we're all going through it. This is a really difficult, painful time for everybody, even though some days I have really good days or really good weeks or really positive things happen. The negative is also swinging in there too, and I'm continuing to surf and ride the wave with all of those different waves. And our sense of separation that we ourselves as animals, literal animals on the planet, and our connection to nature, that dissociation has been what's been able to allow us to do the things that we do that are so harmful to the environment that we live in, that we're a part of.
I think if you're talking to a subset of the population that is not, they just are, listening to what you're saying, but not sure about a practical application. I mean, can you talk about a wound that you're nursing and how you're sitting with it and how you feel like it's getting closer to healing?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's communication and staying present with it. I have a tendency, because of how I was raised in my own conditioning, I could be avoidant, right? Or like stuff things down, or I don't want to rock the boat, or I don't want to be in conflict, or conflict feels scary for me. And so when I have like a difficult emotion come up in my relationship with my partner, my rising up is to talk about it and to share and to like stay present with it while it hurts a lot, and lean into the uncomfortable feelings of vulnerability that show me to be, this isn't the right phrase, but like less than whole, like my broken parts, my really wounded parts, to offer those up and ask even for help. Like, I need help in this area. Can you do this for me so I can heal this wound? Instead of let's pretend that it's fine.
Doesn't that essentially require both people?
Yeah.
So
in this example, it requires both people. But in the solo practice with it, I would say it's just to continue to stay honest with it. So practices that are helpful are journaling and feeling the embodied sensation of what the emotion might be and breathing with that, getting the energy to move to yoga, or even going on a run or on a walk or a hike can help with the movement of energy through the body when it's rising up and feeling stuck. The forgiveness practice, like even the Ho'oponopono, the Hawaiian practice of I'm sorry, please forgive me, thank you, I love you, to yourself is helpful. One that I've been using too.
I mean, in general, the Dalai Lama, John McLaughlin played for the Dalai Lama and got his blessing, and then afterwards the Dalai Lama gave a talk, and he said, most people think Buddhism is my spiritual practice. He's like, wrong, it's happiness. And, we're in quarantine and we're isolating and we're getting mixed messages, and, there's not a uniform policy, so it is sort of like we're on our own. But I just wonder, in general, if you could talk about how vulnerable you are to receiving love.
How vulnerable I am to receiving love.
Because you've been on a pretty singular, I mean, not that you haven't had relationships and, but, just through this trajectory, it's been, this is a singular mission that you've been on, this healing mission. And I just wonder if you believe that you are vulnerable enough to receive love and companionship at this point in your life, or are you evolving in that sense?
Yeah, that's a really beautiful, poignant question. And I've been in a relationship. I was married for 9 years, and I divorced in 2017. Mm-hmm. And then for the past 2.5 years or so, I've been in a new relationship that I feel so healthy and so sweet and so supportive and so fulfilling in so many ways. And I do recognize where in my previous marriage, when I was married, one of the difficulties in the marriage was I was so independent that I was I'm going to take care of me. And that created a sense of disconnection in our intimacy on, energetic and psychospiritual levels. And we were divorced. Not that that's the only reason, but I can recognize my part in the ways that I was internally blocked.
Absolutely.
And so in my new relationship, when I lean into the trust of the love that's present, because he's so loving, it feels scary to me. It feels, it brings up old wounds, like I might not be safe, or I might be abandoned, or this might go away, or can I really trust it, or am I giving too much? Am I really receiving? Can I allow myself to receive? It's a great question. Can I allow myself to receive the love that's there? It's beautiful. And I think at sometimes I can, and other times I can't. Yeah. But I'm working on it.
Well, Radha, we really are just really getting started here. Could we do part 2 maybe in a week or so?
Sure. Yeah, I'd love that.
Okay, great. I didn't get to a lot of stuff, but we've already been cooking here for 73 minutes, and you are, I would say that your honesty and your humbleness allows you to shine at all times. I just would, there is no, one thing I want you to think about for part 2 is just, the sacred nature of birth, and the kind of spiritual presence that occurred when your mother gave birth and you gave birth on the same day. The back end of that and the ability to transcend the cycle of birth and death is death, or is closure. And I want you to, you don't need to answer it now, but I wonder if part of the old way that you referred to is the idea of, it's hard to believe we've lost more people than we lost in 7 years in Vietnam or however long that war was. But there's a lot of people at a certain level of government that are saying there's nothing to see here. There's nothing to grieve about. We must continue down the greed path of consumption and corruption and pillaging of the planet. And there is no acknowledgement or closure for death. I lost my spirit brother here in the beginning of the week that you talked about in Boise, when they, you weren't really sure what's going on, should we shut down or not, and my friend, he passed away at his home, no reason, 52, totally healthy, no drugs, swam every day, planetary sciences professor. He had pressures and stuff, but his ex-wife got the call from the police because he died at home alone, and he was cremated, or he's gone. There was no closure for him. His parents couldn't come from Cupertino. We couldn't have a ceremony, and I also felt like there was something there where I wasn't sure I really don't know if his ex-wife had his best interest in mind. It doesn't matter. It's not my business. The point is, there's thousands of cases like that, no closure with death. And so how that affects the psychospiritual sort of framework of humanity, when you don't have recognition of closure by the federal government in a time of this, because in the past you did feel that at least the government kind of had your back, but that doesn't feel like that anymore,
Well, first, I'm really sorry for your loss, and so many people, like you're saying, that have lost loved ones, grandparents, or who they might be, in isolation, and the ones that those have had to transition through such a monumental life event. The second birth is death. They've had to do that alone. Is absolutely heartbreaking, and that the ceremonies for the family. Saw this episode of the Midnight Gospel that my friend Duncan Trussell, he just put out on Netflix, and it was like the 7th episode or so. He did an interview. It's him taking podcasts and putting it into animation, and in it his guest is a woman. I don't remember her name, but she talks about death, and she goes through kind of the history of death in America, and that even our like funeral system of it is specific to Americans. That most of the world, most humans on the globe, don't treat death the same way. There's not the business around it like there is in the United States.
Yeah,
and she
that's
goes
right.
through how in the Civil War, soldiers from the North were dying, and it being the Protestant country influence that it was, part of the process for the Protestants was you had to see the body before it was buried or cremated. And so they were wanting to take the bodies that were dying in the Civil War and bring them back home. And so they figured out the embalming process of how to preserve the body. So there were these guys that would follow the battles, gather the dead bodies, preserve the bodies, and bring them back home so the families could have their ceremonies with them. And then once the Civil War ended, there was now this new industry business around embalming bodies that didn't have the same flow of dead bodies that it did during the Civil War. So then they started to go around the country, and they basically taught people or put out the propaganda that you caring for the dead body isn't safe for you. It's not healthy for you, that you might get sick, that this dead body is dirty. So I'm the specialist. Give me the body, and I will take care of it for you, and then you can see it. And up until that point, when someone died, they were cared for often by the women of the family, and the body was taken care of, and the family would come and they would have their ceremony, and it was kept within the family, and death was a part of life because we were all dealing with it in whatever way it took shape or happened. And then it was taken away from us. And it's interesting because it's taken away from us in the same way that things are being taken away from us now. That's not safe for you. It's not safe for you to gather with people. It's not safe for you.
I want you to keep marinating on this. Let's just pick this up, and I mean, it's really important because if there is a massive amount of lack of closure, the callousness of humanity will continue, and that's what I worry about.
Yeah.
It's not. There's nothing we can. I mean, if you look at all the symbolism going on, I mean, the toxicity of language within what is supposed to be a pretty, like vanilla process of legislation, it's gotten so toxic that what we're supposed to be covering is our mouth with a mask, because the vulgarity that's come out of our mouths for so long is preventing us from actually seeing our mouths talk. And we've pissed all over the planet for so long that it's healing itself temporarily until the greed factor and consumerism comes back in and says, just ignore the numbers and the grief and don't acknowledge it. And you don't have, I mean, if you have a leader that allows you to collectively grieve, then there is ability to heal. So it's just, anyway, Radha, thank you for healing me and bless you so much. It is so profoundly, I'm so humbled to connect with you.
Thank you. I really appreciate this opportunity to connect with you and get to know you more. I've really enjoyed our conversation so much.
Me too.
I look forward to part 2.
Listen, just let the body dance. Maybe you are a DJ, is that right?
Yeah, I'm a DJ, and I was a radio DJ too.
Well, yeah, and I just want to be clear. If anybody ever called me a radio DJ, I'd want to slip my wrist, but because I consider myself a host. But you went there with me today. You're vulnerable, and you are. And when I put this up, for whoever who's listening now, or when it goes up on the podcast, if we inspire one person to be themselves and live life by their rules and not the rules that society says they should live by, then we've done our job tenfold. So then we're doing it. Yeah, into the light, my friend. Much love.
Yes, thank you.
Bless
Same
you.
to you.
Always, yeah.
Bye, Jake.
Bye. Happy Friday, everybody. This is the Jake Feinberg Show. We'll see you tomorrow.